Prince Andrew, utter bell end. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Earlier, I explained about the aspects of Prince Andrew's behaviour whereby he is regarded as a sex addict, when in actual fact what you're dealing with is an upper lesser type A somatic narcissist. And the use of sex by him, with having a multitude of intimate partners that he picks up and he puts down, that he basically expects women to fall over him, to go to bed with him, is all indicative of his narcissistic traits and his somatic preferences. Simply put, his narcissism harnesses sex as a means to allow him to control people, to draw fuel, and to gain residual benefits, and in some instances possibly also character traits. As an upper lesser type A narcissist, he is the affable arsehole. He might be good company to some people, but there's certainly an aspect of his personality, which is driven by his narcissism, where he comes across as a complete bell end, an utter bell end. And a report by the Daily Mail provides repeated instances of this behaviour, which allows you to understand why he behaves this way, because it's the way that he operates as this particular type of narcissist. Superficial, unreliable, juvenile sense of humour that focuses on the slapstick and the vulgar and the belittlement and downfall of others. A very rudimentary and almost teenage approach to things, as you're about to hear. Apparently, Andrew's favourite activities at parties, before of course getting down and dirty with whoever he'd laid his paws upon, was to play choo-choo trains, where everyone danced around the room in a conga, shouting choo-choo. You can see why he's not a cerebral narcissist. Or games in which pieces of fruit were passed from under one person's chin to the next. You should also have picked up on the fact that these activities, these games, would require close physical proximity, which would allow him to place his hands upon people and get close to people to draw fuel from them. One friend of his admitted he's a nightmare to sit next to at dinner. He makes ghastly jokes about whether you're wearing knickers, lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, and you can't tell him to sod off. They added that his jokes were so lavatorially disgusting, everyone was aghast, lack of emotional empathy. One of his dates said, he tells the most pathetic jokes. He finds poo cushions funny, or otherwise whoopee cushions, you know, the ones that people sit on and go. Prince Edward, after his then-girlfriend, Romy Adlington, had accepted an invitation to go duck shooting at Sandringham in 1983, warned her, "The bad news is that you might have to drive up with my brother." And so it proved, with Andrew joking about farting and asking her, "Don't you find they always smell worse when you do them in the bath?" This is somebody that he'd only just met. Demonstrates his sense of entitlement and haughty dismissiveness to talk about such crude matters and a lack of boundary recognition. No wonder that a titled lady of his generation said, "He is easily the most boorish man that I've ever met." A strong and juvenile characteristic of his is to take advantage of his position to humiliate others who may not be able to respond. At a society event in 1992, he unzipped broadcaster Tanya Breyer's evening dress the full length of her back. Lack of boundary recognition, humiliation. His idea of fun is to get guests at parties to close their eyes, then place an open tube of mustard between their outstretched hands and to get them to clap. The spectacle of someone receiving a faceful of mustard gives him great joy, said a source. Or, in other words, more accurately, a source of fuel. At one dinner party, he sniffed the pâté served as a first course and turned to his right. "This pâté smells, what do you think?" His female companion leaned forward to smell it, and he promptly pushed her face into the dish. Sometimes, partly from boredom or mischievousness, he simply wants to provoke a reaction. Well, it's not born out of boredom or mischievousness. It's about the need to provoke in order to receive fuel. There is the story of how he once walked into a room where people were watching television. He changed channels, paused, then walked out. Provocation. Andrew has always had a strong sense of status, but been unsure otherwise of his identity, which, of course, is the classic problem that the narcissists face. He doesn't, of course, know that he's a narcissist. As a child playing on the decks of the Royal Yacht Britannia when addressed as laddie by a sailor, he replied to the much older man, "I'm not a laddie, I'm a prince." So, although that's accurate, it shows his haughtiness at an early age. And this problem of deciding when he is a prince and when he is a normal person has bedeviled his whole life. At a house party in Dorset, one young woman complained, "1 minute you're having your bum pinched, and the next minute he's reminding you he's your Royal Highness." Contradiction, compartmentalization. One of his dates recalled how he always introduced himself to her friends as the Duke of York. Even when we were dancing at tables in 2 in the morning at Momo, it struck me how impressed he was with who he is. Grandiosity, triangulation with title. Or how impressed he wanted others to be with him. Once playing golf in a group of 4, Andrew hit an especially good shot onto the green. One of the other golfers said, "Good shot." The prince fired back instantly, "That's good shot, sir, for you." Haughtiness, arrogance. If he walked into a room and people didn't acknowledge his presence, he's been known to clear his throat, saying, "Let's try that again," then leaves the room and comes back to make sure everybody stands, bows, and curtsies. Haughtiness, arrogance. He could also be unbelievably cruel. In 2005, after a heavy storm at Hillsborough Castle, Andrew asked the head of the household, David Anderson, if there was any damage. "Yes, sir," responded Anderson, "the tree which was planted by the Queen Mother." This was followed by a withering silence. Then Andrew said in a mocking voice, "Did you mean Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother?" He then asked the poor man how long he'd worked for the royal family. Anderson replied, "I joined in 1984, sir." "And you still don't know the proper way to refer to my grandmother, you fucking imbecile. Get out." Rudeness, arrogance, obnoxious behaviour. The prince has remained totally out of touch with reality. Lucy, a former stylist who dated him, was surprised that when she offered to take him to the cinema and said she'd buy the tickets, he expected her to get all 7, to include his security. Sense of entitlement. Everything revolves around Andrew and is about him. In this, he reminded the journalist Petronella Wyatt, who first met him at a society party in the 1990s, of Princess Margaret, who thought she was more royal than the Queen. He talked, and you had to listen. Sense of entitlement, grandiosity. He ignored all attempts to change the conversation and continued to make inappropriate jokes. Obnoxious. He's the most out-of-touch royal I've ever met, and I've met lots. He really does believe in the divine right of kings. One woman who met him at a party in Saint-Tropez said, "He doesn't have much conversation other than himself." Self-absorption. The wife of a former naval colleague remembered that all he could talk about was how you could tell the difference between a real Rolex and a fake. The fake ticks, the real one swishes. Awkward in company, he finds it hard to relate to people. This is because he has no emotional empathy and has few friends. His former girlfriend, Koo Stark's marriage to Green Shield Stamp's heir, Tim Jeffries, in 1984, deeply unsettled Andrew. He admitted to a friend, "I'm a loner, I really am. Yet when I say that, no one believes me. I'd really like to be married, but I've yet to meet the right girl." Pity play. Ian Hendry, a fellow naval cadet with Andrew at Dartmouth Naval College, found him a bit remote, standoffishness, and thought he compensated for shyness by being over-ebullient. Not at all. That's just the way that his narcissism is. He stands aloof from people because he believes he's better than everybody else. Hendry cast him as a slightly lonely figure who didn't really know how to make friends. That's because of the awkwardness of his bombastic nature in terms of his affable arsehole narcissism. He was confused how to behave as he moved between the naval and royal world. Barriers were put up as a coping mechanism, and he became bombastic. Another cadet who served with the prince and twice got lifts to London in his police escort got to know Andrew slowly because he was such a loner, but also found him a strange mix, someone who did not appear to feel relaxed about his position as a prince. Andrew was not naturally good at making friends. He would relax, then stiffen up. He wasn't a person with whom one could get close. In 2021, after this one's wife was accused of bullying staff, Buckingham Palace braced itself for historic complaints about Prince Andrew's bullying, profanities and impossible demands. A former aide has been reduced to tears after being bawled at in a phone call before dawn because Andrew was unhappy with the story in the Sun newspaper. Haughtiness. A member of staff was moved to other duties because Andrew disliked a mole on the man's face. Belittlement. Another because the man was wearing a nylon tie. Some say a report on bullying accusations against this one's wife has never been released because it would also raise questions about the behaviour of the Queen's second son. The way Andrew treated staff caused one royal aide to describe him as a deeply unpleasant man. Colin Burgess, who served as equerry to the Queen Mother for many years, felt he was treated with disdain by Andrew, in stark contrast to the respect for staff shown by Prince William and Charles, the then Prince of Wales. For Charles, the Queen Mother's staff were her companions, but to Andrew they were just employees. I saw him about once a month when he came to visit Clarence House, and he would talk to the staff, including me, as an officer talks to his subordinates. He would say such things as, "I want this done, and I want it done now," ordering people around, sense of entitlement. "Do it," was his catchphrase. I remember nearly telling him where to go when he came to Clarence House and wanted something wrapped. He looked at me and barked, "You, wrap that," and pointed to some object. I just thought, "You rude, ignorant sod," and felt like decking him. In all honesty, he wasn't a particularly nice person. Because Andrew has never been disciplined, he knows he can behave exactly as he wishes. A favourite game was to insist on driving himself and then deliberately lose the backup protection car by speeding up the motorway and suddenly turning off into a side road. Bell End. His protection officers were called on to collect his golf balls after he had driven them down the fairway, and maids summoned from 4 floors below to open the curtains right beside him. Ordering people around, sense of entitlement. He once called a television technician at night to show him how to work the remote control on a television set. Wendy Berry, the housekeeper at Highgrove, whose son worked at Buckingham Palace, noted that for the Duke, staff were basically invisible, there to serve and not to question his actions. His thoughtfulness upset most of the housemaids and valets who worked for him, again demonstrating his narcissist behaviour. Apparently, his bedtime habits as a single man left a lot to be desired, she said. A collection of scrunched-up soiled tissues usually laid scattered around the bed each morning for staff to collect after they'd made his bed. How delightful, having to pick up the wanking tissues of Prince Andrew. Andrew has always felt the rules did not apply to him. Lack of accountability. Starting at Heatherdown, his prep school, when a box of exotic stamps went missing. After a search, they were found in his desk. Asset appropriation. Lack of boundary recognition. According to one of his classmates, he'd crossed out the name of the owner and put his own name on it. When discovered, he simply shrugged it off. Nullification of threat to control. Lack of accountability. Stories abound of him being banned from golf clubs because he ignored club rules on the use of mobile phones. In October 2005, he refused to go through a security scanner at Melbourne Airport on a private visit, claiming that lack of respect had been demonstrated. A security worker said, "What a pompous prick. Everyone has to go through screening. He should be happy to do so," and set an example. And then there is a history of road incidents. In 2002, he was stopped by police for speeding at 60 miles an hour in a 40-mile-per-hour area. Sense of entitlement, lack of accountability. Rushing to catch a plane to Scotland to watch the Open Golf Championship. The offence carries a minimum fine of £60 and 3 penalty points, but Andrew was let off on the grounds that, "I'm in a hurry." On another occasion, he had an accident driving his Range Rover near Boreham Wood. His protection officer took the blame. Blame shifting. Evasion of accountability. In July 2009, the Windsor Park lodge keepers signed a petition to the Queen complaining about Andrew speeding through the park in his Aston Martin and forcing them to leap out of the way as he zooms past. Sense of entitlement. Travelling to Royal Lodge in March 2016 in his £80,000 Range Rover, he found the gate sensor in Windsor Great Park broken. Instead of taking a mile detour, he rammed the gates open, causing thousands of pounds worth of damage, sense of entitlement, destruction to property, money that ultimately came from the taxpayer, sense of entitlement, freeloader. A Windsor worker likened him to Toad of Toad Hall, who thinks he can do what he likes. And he gets away with it. He hit a policeman as he sped into Buckingham Palace. The uniformed officer suffered an arm injury and complained to his bosses, but nothing was done. Nothing was done either when he was playing in an exhibition golf match at the Belfry in 1998 and hooked his drive into a bunker. According to an observer, he took a quick look at his ball, didn't fancy the lie, picked it up and threw it sideways onto a better one. Such an act called for at least a 1 or possibly a 2-stroke penalty, but nobody said anything. His arrogance is breathtaking. A friend of his once had a lift in his chauffeured car with police escort from Buckingham Palace to Canary Wharf. With all of the traffic stopped, the journey took under 8 minutes. The friend asked Andrew if he felt embarrassed that everything had to stop for him. "Oh, no," he said. "People don't seem to mind at all. Clueless, self-absorbed, arrogant." One day, a train taking the Duke to Birmingham was cancelled, and he was told he would wait in the VIP lounge for the hour until the next one departed. He was furious, venting his rage at his equerry. Why can't they organise another one? Heated, ignited fury, sense of entitlement. He flicked his hand and shouted, "That train over there, for example. Why can't they divert that train to Birmingham?" Another time, Andrew asked to have lunch with Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London, turning up with a list of things he wanted to talk about. He wanted to redesign traffic lights with fewer red lights. He thought the whole of Battersea Power Station should be demolished, including the listed towers. He felt the Queen Elizabeth II Centre rather, was too small and not fit for purpose. Johnson responded, "Well, if it's too small, it's your mum's fault." Andrew stuck his tongue out at Boris Johnson. Afterwards, Boris said, "I'm the last person to be a Republican, but fuck, if I ever have to spend another lunch like that, I soon will be." Instance after instance after instance of the arrogance, obnoxious, haughty, self-absorbed behaviours of Prince Andrew, all adding up to demonstrate that he is, of course, an utter bell end, driven by his narcissism. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.